I knew something was wrong the moment I saw dead fish floating next to my dock. The water, it wasn't the same anymore. It smelled like metal, it burned my skin when I touched it, and every morning it looked worse. And yet, the HOA kept insisting that nothing was wrong, that it was natural. But then I found it. A hidden pipe buried under the community walkway. A pipe dumping chemicals directly into my lake. And what the HOA didn't know is that I recorded everything. When I sent the water for testing and the results came back, I realized the HOA hadn't just poisoned the lake to stop me from fishing. They'd accidentally contaminated something they desperately needed to protect. Their entire plan backfired, and the secret I uncovered? It changed everything. I never planned on living by the lake. It wasn't some lifelong dream or a romantic idea I'd carried since childhood. It just happened. Life had gotten noisy, busy, and too crowded with problems that didn't feel like mine to hold anymore. I wanted space. I wanted quiet. I wanted somewhere I could breathe without feeling like I owed the world an explanation for simply existing. So when I found the small cabin by the lake, almost hidden behind tall pine trees, with a dock that leaned a little too far to one side, I knew instantly that this place was meant for me. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't modern. It didn't even have good insulation. But the first time I stepped onto that dock and felt the soft morning wind brush against my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The lake wasn't huge. It was maybe a mile long, shaped like a crooked teardrop, with water so clear you could see the rocks at the bottom when the sun was high. In the early mornings, when the mist rolled across the surface, it felt like the world slowed down. Everything became soft, quiet, safe. I fished there every morning. Not to catch food, not for sport, not even for fun. I did it because it grounded me. There was a rhythm to it. The sound of the line hitting the water, the gentle rocking of the dock, the small splashes when fish broke the surface. It felt like meditation. Like therapy without the pressure of speaking. It was just me, the water, and the silence. For the first year, everything was perfect. Then the HOA came. When I bought the cabin, there was no homeowners association. Just a mix of older folks who'd lived there forever and a handful of newer families who liked the quiet life. But when the old community board dissolved, a group of motivated residents stepped in, convinced we needed structure and rules. I didn't realize how serious they were until I came home one afternoon and saw a bright orange paper stuck to my door. Mandatory HOA meeting, attendance required. Required. That word made my stomach tighten a little. Still, I told myself it was harmless. Probably just people introducing themselves, setting up some neighborhood events, maybe discussing maintenance. Nothing to be worried about. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first meeting felt like stepping into a courtroom. The new HOA president, a woman named Gloria, stood at the front with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everything about her screamed control. Her posture was stiff, her voice was sharp, and every sentence she spoke sounded like a rule disguised as a suggestion. "We need to maintain order in our community," she said. "And that includes enforcing shared guidelines for the lake." When she said the word lake, I felt something shift. A cold little pressure inside my chest. My hand shot up. The lake isn't shared. The lake is part of my land deeds. It's privately owned. Gloria smiled again, that same tight, forced smile. Yes, but the lake affects the entire neighborhood environment. So certain activities, like fishing, need to follow community-approved regulations. Community-approved regulations. For something I owned. I didn't argue further that night. I could feel the eyes of the room turning toward me, some curious, some annoyed, a few sympathetic. I just nodded politely, kept my face neutral, and went home. The next morning, I did what I always did. I grabbed my fishing rod, stepped onto the dock, and let the early sunlight warm my face. I tried to push the meeting out of my mind. Tried to believe that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the HOA was just trying to organize things, maybe they weren't focused on the lake, Maybe. My thoughts broke when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw two HOA members filming me with their phones. Filming. One of them, a tall man with sunglasses, spoke in a firm voice. "You're violating the new wildlife disturbance guidelines. This will be reported." Wildlife disturbance. Fishing. I kept my voice calm, even though frustration coiled tight in my stomach. "This is my property. And this lake is privately owned. You can't create rules around it." They didn't answer. They just kept recording. Then they walked away. That was the first real sign that something was off. But I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it would blow over. I thought maybe once they realized they had no jurisdiction, they'd leave me alone. But the notices kept coming. Warning: unauthorized fishing. Reminder: HOA rules apply to all residents. Final notice: stop all non-approved lake activities. Every new paper on my door chipped away at the peace I had found here. And then one day, a letter arrived in the mail. A formal letter. The kind printed on thick paper with embossed lettering at the top. Lake usage violation, immediate compliance required. They were threatening fines. They were threatening further disciplinary action. For using my own lake. I went to the next HOA meeting, ready to confront them calmly, ready to explain everything again. But when I walked into the room, the air felt different. Heavier. People whispered. Some looked away. Gloria sat at the front with a stack of documents. "We've received multiple complaints about your behavior," she announced. "We can't allow one resident to disrupt the ecological balance of the lake." Ecological balance. What balance was I disturbing? I opened my mouth to speak, but she cut me off. "You can challenge this through the proper channels. For now, all lake activity is prohibited." The room murmured. I stood still. My jaw clenched. My chest tightened. That lake was my home. My peace. My refuge. And now they were trying to take it away. I walked out of the meeting without saying another word. I didn't trust myself to speak without my voice shaking. When I got home, I sat on the dock for hours, watching the water ripple in the evening breeze. I told myself that the worst was over. That this was just an HOA trying to exert control. That eventually, they would get bored and move on. But the truth was, something bigger was already happening. Something hidden. Something deliberate. Something that would change everything. Because all the while I was fighting paper notices and arguments, the lake itself was changing. I just didn't see the first signs early enough. I didn't notice the faint metallic smell. I didn't notice the slight cloudiness creeping into the water. I didn't notice the strange residue forming near the rocks. Not until the day the first fish floated to the surface. And by then, it was already too late. The morning I found the first dead fish, I remember feeling a strange kind of disbelief. It was early, maybe just after sunrise, and the mist was still hanging over the water like a thin blanket. I stepped onto the dock the same way I did every day. Slow, careful, letting the wood settle under my weight. I had my thermos in one hand and my fishing rod in the other. I was ready for my quiet routine. But then I saw it. A small silver fish, floating sideways near the edge of the dock. At first, I thought it was hurt or stunned. That happens sometimes after storms. But when I nudged it with the tip of my shoe, it didn't move. It just bobbed gently in the cold water. I frowned. One dead fish wasn't alarming on its own. Nature is messy. Things happen. But something in my chest tightened anyway. Something felt off. I crouched down and touched the water with my fingertips. It felt colder than usual. And there was a faint smell, something sharp, something metallic, something that didn't belong in a freshwater lake. I pulled my hand back instinctively. I told myself not to overthink it. Not everything was a sign. Not everything was the HOA. But the next morning, there were 3 more dead fish. And the morning after that, Nearly a dozen. They floated in the shallow areas, near the rocks, near the dock, near the small inlet where water flowed into the larger stream. Different sizes. Different types. All dead. By the fourth day, the lake looked sick. The water wasn't clear anymore. It had taken on a dull, murky tint that deepened every morning. It wasn't mud. It wasn't algae. It was something else. Something unnatural. And the smell, it had grown stronger. Not rotten, not fishy, but chemical. The smell you get when someone uses harsh detergent or industrial cleaner. The kind of smell you don't ignore. I felt fear. Real fear. Not for myself, but for the lake. This place had given me peace for so long. Watching it deteriorate felt like watching someone I loved slowly suffocate. I decided to walk around the shoreline, see if I could find any signs of what was happening. I didn't expect much, maybe a clogged inlet, maybe someone dumping trash without realizing the damage, but I needed answers. As I walked, I noticed something strange near the community side of the lake. There was a thin line of residue forming along the edge. White. Chalky. When I crouched and touched it with a stick, it crumbled like dried soap. My stomach dropped. I looked around. The nearest house was dark. The community pathway was empty. Everything was silent, except for the soft sound of water lapping against the rocks. "What are you doing?" The voice behind me almost made me jump. I turned around to see Gloria, the HOA president, standing on the path with her arms crossed. She wasn't dressed like someone out for a walk. She was in office clothes, jacket and all. Too formal for morning. Too deliberate. "I'm checking the shoreline," I said. "Something's wrong with the lake." Her face didn't change. No surprise. No concern. Nothing. "The lake is fine," she said calmly. "You're overreacting." I pointed at the residue. "Then explain this. And the dead fish." She looked down for a moment, then shrugged lightly. "Seasonal die-off. It happens." "No, it doesn't. Not like this." I kept my voice steady, but my frustration was growing. "The water smells like chemicals." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you suggesting something?" I held her gaze. "I'm saying something is poisoning this lake." She let out a small, dismissive laugh. "Maybe you should stop spending so much time here. You're imagining problems because you don't like the HOA. Your perception is biased." I clenched my jaw. There it was. The manipulation. Turning concern into paranoia. Blaming me instead of addressing the issue. She turned to leave, pausing only long enough to say, "If you continue spreading unfounded rumors about environmental hazards, we'll have to issue a formal violation." A violation. For being worried about the lake. I watched her walk away, her heels tapping against the stone pathway, each step feeling like a warning. Something inside me twisted. She didn't even care enough to pretend. That was the moment I realized this wasn't ignorance. This was avoidance. Distraction. Cover-up. Something was happening behind the scenes, and the HOA didn't want me anywhere near it. Over the next week, things got worse. The water turned cloudy enough that I couldn't see the rocks anymore. The fish population decreased dramatically. Even the birds stopped landing on the surface. I'd never seen that happen before. Ducks, cranes, herons, they avoided the lake entirely, as if they sensed something dangerous. The smell became strong enough that I couldn't stand on the dock for long. One night, around 11 p.m., I stepped outside to take the trash out and heard a sound coming from the direction of the community pathway. The sound of something moving, something mechanical. A low hum. Curiosity pulled me forward. I followed the noise, staying low behind the trees. The path was dimly lit by one flickering streetlight, but I could see movement near the small maintenance shed. 2 people. Wearing reflective vests. Standing near a large container on wheels. The container was connected to a hose. A hose that fed into a small pipe. A pipe that ran toward the lake. My heart slammed in my chest. I watched as they flipped a switch, and the container released something liquid, into the pipe. The smell hit me, even from where I stood. Harsh. Chemical. Wrong. I froze. They were dumping something into the lake. And the HOA had insisted everything was fine. I didn't move until they packed up and left. When they were gone, I crept toward the small pipe opening. It was partially hidden beneath bushes and rocks. Without the quiet night and the mechanical humming, I never would have noticed it. But what I saw confirmed everything I'd been afraid of. The pipe wasn't old. It was new. Fresh PVC. Clean cuts on the ends. Recently installed. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't runoff. This wasn't seasonal die-off. Someone had built a system to dump something directly into the lake. I pulled out my phone and tried to record, but it was too dark. The camera wouldn't capture anything clearly. I needed daylight. I needed evidence. I needed a plan. But most of all, I needed answers. Why would anyone, any group, poison a lake? There was no benefit. No reason. No logic. Unless it wasn't just about the lake. Unless it was about me. A cold realization crawled through my chest. Was the HOA doing this because they wanted to stop me from fishing? Would they go this far just to enforce control? It seemed insane. Irrational. Unthinkable. But so was installing a chemical pipe secretly at night. I went to bed that night feeling a mix of fear and determination. Fear for what was happening. Determination to uncover it. Because the lake was dying. And if I didn't act soon, it wouldn't survive. And neither would the truth. I barely slept the night I discovered the pipe. Every sound outside pulled me out of bed. Every creak of wood, every rustle of wind, every distant car door. My mind kept replaying the image of those two people in reflective vests, quietly dumping chemicals into the water as if it were the most normal thing in the world. By morning, my nerves were stretched tight. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. The fear was still there, yes, but it sat behind something stronger. A simple, steady resolve. I needed proof. Actual proof. Something recorded in daylight, clear and undeniable. Something the HOA couldn't twist into misunderstanding, or overreaction, or seasonal die-off. So after a quick breakfast I barely tasted, I grabbed my phone, my camera, and a small notepad. Then I walked the long way around the lake, staying out of sight of the main community path. I wasn't taking chances. Not after last night. The pipe was easy to find now that I knew where it was. Hidden behind bushes. Covered with rocks. Placed carefully so that unless you were looking right at it, it blended into the natural layout of the bank. But in the morning light, the truth was impossible to hide. The water around the pipe's mouth was discolored. Not evenly, but in faint cloudy streaks that drifted slowly toward the deeper part of the lake. I crouched down and lifted a rock near the pipe. The same chalky residue from before clung to the underside. It crumbled under my touch. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just negligence. This wasn't runoff or drainage or anything innocent. Someone was feeding chemicals into the water on purpose. And they'd installed a whole system to do it. I took pictures from every angle, wide shots, close shots, shots of the ground, the residue, the pipe joints, the faint discoloration. Then I took videos too. I narrated everything calmly, explaining where I was, what was visible, and why it mattered. I didn't want anything to seem like speculation. When I was done, I walked along the path to see where the pipe led. It snaked through the bushes, past a row of planted shrubs, then disappeared underground near the maintenance shed. The same shed where I'd heard the humming the night before. The shed wasn't locked heavily, just a basic handle lock that looked like it belonged on a backyard storage box. But I wasn't going to break in. Not yet. I needed to stay on the right side of the law. Instead, I circled the shed from a distance, taking subtle photos. And when I got around to the back, I stopped. There were tire tracks. Fresh ones. Deep enough that the soil underneath still held moisture. They formed a neat pattern leading away from the shed toward a section of the community road that only HOA members used for maintenance access. That meant a vehicle large enough to carry a chemical container had been parked here. Recently. Probably last night. I snapped the photo. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. More like adrenaline, the kind that told me I was getting closer to something real. When I got back to my cabin, I transferred all the footage to my laptop, created a separate folder, and backed it all up on an external drive. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the evidence. It was enough to prove something unnatural was happening. But it wasn't enough to prove who was doing it. And the HOA was too slippery, too confident, too prepared. I needed irrefutable proof they were behind the pipe. So I decided to gather more. For the next several days, I lived as if nothing had happened. I still walked around the lake. I still sat on the dock. I still made eye contact with neighbors and waved as always. But inside, every sense was alert. Every sound of footsteps made my pulse jump. Every HOA message posted online felt like another piece of a puzzle I was trying to solve. I didn't want to spy. I didn't want conflict. If anything, I wanted peace more than ever. But the lake kept getting worse. And when you love something, you don't watch it die in silence. One evening, I noticed something odd. The HOA had suddenly closed off the maintenance route. They claimed it was under review for repairs, but I could tell it was a lie. They'd put up cones, yellow tape, and even a sign saying, "No resident access. Authorized personnel only." Authorized personnel. That phrase stuck with me. It meant activity. It meant secrecy. It meant they were doing something back there. So that night, just after sunset, I positioned myself behind a row of trees near the maintenance shed. Not too close. Not too far. Just enough distance to observe without being seen. Hours passed. My back ached. My legs went numb from crouching. But I stayed. I had to. Then, sometime after 11 p.m., I heard it again. That same quiet hum. A few seconds later, a small vehicle, a golf cart with a large container in the back, pulled up near the shed. Two people jumped out. Same style reflective vests. Same hurried movements. Same routine. They opened the shed. Pulled out the hose. Connected it to the container. My heart raced. This time I had the camera ready. I recorded everything. Zoomed in. Adjusted focus. Kept my breathing slow so the audio wouldn't shake. Then one of the men spoke. "Gloria wants this done before morning." I almost dropped the phone. There it was. A name. A direct connection. I pressed my hand over my mouth, forcing myself to stay silent. They moved quickly, as if they'd done this many times before. They dumped the liquid. Disconnected the hose. Packed everything away. And then, as they drove off, the taller man said, "If anyone asks, this is just wastewater treatment. Don't mention the supply line." Supply line? What supply line? My heart pounded in my chest. I stayed hidden until the sound of the vehicle faded completely. Only then did I slowly rise and back away through the trees. Once inside my cabin, I locked the door, closed all the blinds, and played the footage over and over. Their faces weren't clear, but their voices were. Their words were. And the mention of Gloria was unmistakable. That was the moment everything changed. This wasn't about fishing. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about ecological balance. The HOA was hiding something. Something connected to the lake, the pipe, and a supply line I didn't understand yet. And whatever they were trying to cover up, they were desperate to keep it buried. I backed up the new footage immediately. Then I sat in the dark of my living room, the faint chemical smell from the lake drifting through the walls, and realized something terrifying. If they were willing to poison the lake just to enforce control, or hide something deeper, What else were they willing to do? And more importantly, how far would they go if they discovered I knew the truth? I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying everything in circles: the secret pipe, the chemical tank, the lies, the arguments, and the way every HOA board member acted as if poisoning a lake was a normal administrative decision. I lay awake staring at my ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the fan, thinking about every family in the neighborhood, every child who played near the water, every dog that drank from the lake, every person who relied on that creek-connected well without having any idea their own HOA had been poisoning it. And the worst part? They still thought they had the upper hand. They thought I was just some angry homeowner with a camera and a grudge. They had no idea how much evidence I had, how many conversations I had recorded, or how far their actions had actually reached. By morning, I had a plan. A careful, patient, quiet plan. No shouting matches. No confrontations. No warnings. Just the truth, delivered to the right people. The first move, the certified letter, around 10 a.m. I printed out the lab results. Both copies. The one from the private lab, and the one from the state lab that I received late the previous night. The second set was far worse. It included a note at the bottom: "This water is unsafe for human consumption. Immediate investigation advised." That was enough on its own to cause panic. But combined with the photos, the pipe footage, the timestamps, and the HOA's written notice telling me to stop fishing indefinitely, it became explosive. I placed everything into a thick envelope and sent it directly to the County Environmental Safety Department. No email. No phone call. A physical certified letter. Something they legally had to open and respond to. Once that envelope left my hands, there was no turning back. The neighborhood begins to notice that evening. Something unexpected happened. Around 6 p.m., as the sun dipped behind the trees, I was standing on my dock staring at the water when I heard footsteps behind me. It was my neighbor, Elena, the one who always walked her golden retriever around the lake. She looked worried. More worried than I'd ever seen her. "Hey, I know this is awkward," she said quietly, "but is something wrong with the water? My dog got sick last night. The vet said it might be contamination." I didn't know what to say at first. I wasn't ready to expose everything yet, but I also couldn't lie. "What makes you think it's the lake?" I asked. She pointed at the shoreline. "The smell. And the color. It's changed. You noticed it too, right?" I nodded slowly. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "I asked the HOA if they tested it, and they told me you were the one causing trouble and spreading rumors." Of course. Of course they had started trying to control the narrative. "But my dog got better after I stopped letting him near the water," she whispered. "So now I'm scared. Really scared." I took a breath. "Keep him away from the lake," I said. "Just for now." Her eyes widened a little. She understood the seriousness of my tone, but she didn't push further. "Please tell me if you find out anything," she said before walking away. And as I watched her disappear behind the trees, I realized something important. The HOA wasn't just harming me anymore. People were beginning to notice. And once fear spreads, truth follows right behind it. The HOA doubles down the very next morning, at 9:14 a.m. I received an email from the HOA. An official notice. This time in bold letters. Unauthorized tampering with community property. It accused me of disturbing protected land, breaking HOA rules, entering restricted maintenance areas, conducting illegal water testing, and creating a hostile environment. Then, at the bottom, a fine of $1,000 will be applied if you do not cease immediately. I read it twice. Then a third time. It was almost funny. They still thought I was playing a game with them. They still had no idea what was coming their way. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. Instead, I forwarded the email to the county investigator assigned to my case, someone named Inspector Jarrett, who had emailed me earlier saying he received my documents and was reviewing for immediate action. Jarrett replied within 5 minutes. "Do not speak to them. Do not respond to any notices. I will contact you soon. That was the first moment I felt real relief. Not complete relief, but a small, grounding sense that I wasn't alone in this anymore. Then the storm hit, not a real storm, a storm of consequences. 2 days later, at 8:30 in the morning, I was pouring coffee when I heard the rumble of large engines outside. I stepped onto my porch and froze. 3 white county vehicles were parked across the opening of the cul-de-sac. Environmental safety officers were stepping out. 2 people in hazmat suits were unloading equipment. And leading them was Inspector Jarrett. He walked straight toward me. "You're the homeowner who sent the report?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't waste a second. "We have an emergency order to inspect the lake, test the soil, and review the HOA's maintenance records. This is officially a county-level investigation now." I felt adrenaline rush through my chest. "Do you need anything from me?" I asked. "Your footage, your timeline, and your cooperation. We'll handle the rest." Before I could answer, the HOA president, Mark, stormed out of the clubhouse, red-faced and furious. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just barge into community property. We have procedures," he shouted. Jarrett didn't even look at him. "We're here under state environmental mandate," he said calmly. "Step aside." Mark sputtered something about rights, permissions, privacy, but no one listened. For the first time, he wasn't in control. He wasn't the one holding authority. And that terrified him. I watched as the inspectors walked toward the lake. Hazmat suits shimmering in the sunlight. Equipment carts rolling over the grass. Cameras clicking. Measuring devices beeping. Neighbors started gathering outside their homes, whispering to one another. Fear. Curiosity. Confusion. Someone asked Mark what was happening. He lied instantly. "It's routine maintenance. Nothing to worry about." But people weren't buying it anymore. Not after the smell. Not after the strange water. Not after pets getting sick. For the first time, the HOA wasn't the unquestioned authority. The cracks were beginning to show. The discovery that changed everything around noon. Inspector Jarrett approached me with a serious expression. "We found something," he said quietly. "Something big." My heart pounded. "What is it?" He motioned for me to follow him down the path toward the maintenance area, the same place where I first found the pipe. But this time, the inspectors had dug deeper. Literally. They uncovered a second pipe. A larger one. Buried deeper underground. Leading away from the lake, toward the residential water system. I felt my knees weaken. "You're saying," "Yes," he cut in. "The contamination didn't stay in the lake. It traveled." "Into the well?" He nodded. "Not just into the well. Into the irrigation system, and potentially into several homes." I stood there in silence, the weight of it hitting me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a fishing dispute anymore. This wasn't an HOA rule argument. This was a public health disaster, covered up by the people responsible for protecting the community. Jarrett exhaled slowly. "We'll need full statements. And the HOA will be required to hand over all maintenance logs, if they haven't destroyed them already." He looked me in the eyes. "This investigation isn't just local anymore. The state is stepping in." Everything went quiet around me. Even the birds. Even the wind. I realized then, the HOA's collapse wasn't beginning. It was already happening. And nothing could stop what came next. The next 48 hours were the longest I'd ever lived through. Not because I was scared, but because everything that had been hidden for months, maybe even years, was finally coming to the surface. The county posted an emergency notice on every mailbox, door, and community board, water use restrictions in effect. Potential contamination under investigation. Avoid lake contact until further notice. Neighbors gasped. Parents panicked. People started calling each other, asking what was going on. And all of it pointed toward one place, the HOA. The same HOA that had been telling everyone everything was normal. The same HOA that insisted the lake was safe and accused me of creating drama. Now they couldn't hide anything. But this was only the beginning. The meeting that changed everything 2 days later, a mandatory emergency HOA meeting was called. The clubhouse was packed. More people than I'd ever seen there before. Some stood against the walls. Some sat on the floor. Some held their kids close. Everyone looked angry, worried, and confused. The HOA board sat at the front table looking like they were about to face a firing squad. Mark, the president, kept his eyes down. His hands were shaking. I took a seat in the back. I didn't need to speak. My evidence had already done the speaking for me. At exactly 7 p.m., Inspector Jarrett and 2 state officials walked into the room. Silence spread instantly. Jarrett placed a thick file on the table, then turned to the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Thank you for attending. We're here to discuss the results of the environmental investigation. Every parent leaned forward. Every neighbor froze. Every HOA board member stiffened like they were made of stone. The truth finally revealed. Jarrett began with the basics. Tests, water quality readings, contamination ranges, stuff that made the room tense but silent. Then he opened the file and pulled out the photographs. The pipe. The chemical tank. The soil readings. The contamination spread map. Every picture felt like a punch to the room. Gasps. Crying. A few angry whispers. But then Jarrett said the words that ended the HOA's control forever. This contamination was not caused by natural conditions. It was the result of human action. Deliberate redirection of runoff and chemical disposal. A ripple went through the room, like a soundless explosion. Jarrett continued, these decisions were made without environmental permits, proper reporting, or homeowner notification. Then he looked directly at the HOA board. Every set of eyes followed him. We have evidence showing these actions were taken under the authority of this board. The room erupted. Shouting. Demanding answers. Calling names. Parents standing up screaming about their kids getting sick. People yelling about dogs, gardens, pipes, everything. The board didn't say a word. They sat there pale and frozen, like they knew it was over. And it was. When the shouting finally died down, Jarrett raised his hand. The state will be pressing charges for environmental violations, negligence, and intentional falsification of records. This board is hereby suspended effective immediately. At that moment, the room went completely silent. Not one sound. People stared in disbelief. The mighty HOA, the people who controlled every fence, lawn, paint color, garden size, and backyard activity, were being removed in front of everyone. And I watched it happen with a calm, steady breath. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. After the meeting, when the meeting ended, people slowly walked out in shock. Some cried quietly. Some looked angry enough to break something. Some just stared at the ground, overwhelmed. A few neighbors came up to me. Not all at once. One by one. First was Elena, the woman with the golden retriever. You knew, she whispered. You tried to warn us, didn't you? I nodded. She hugged me without warning. Thank you, she said, for not giving up. Then other neighbors approached. Some apologized for doubting me. Some thanked me. Some were simply embarrassed they hadn't noticed earlier. I didn't hold anything against them. The HOA had lied to all of us, and they did it convincingly. The legal fallout over the next week, everything escalated. The state filed charges against 3 board members. Mark, the HOA president, resigned in disgrace. Emergency cleanup crews arrived. A temporary administrator replaced the entire board. Lawyers began contacting homeowners for health evaluations. The community demanded transparency, real transparency, for the first time ever. In the middle of all this, I gave my full statement to the investigators. I handed over every file, every video, every lab report, every email the HOA sent me. I did it without anger, without shouting, without pride, just the truth. And the truth was enough to tear down people who once believed they were untouchable. The final turn about a month later, I was standing on my dock, the lake still closed, water still quarantined, when Inspector Jarrett walked up behind me. "You might want to hear this," he said, handing me a document. It was a summary report for the case. Then he pointed at the last section. I read it slowly. Initial motive appears to be suppression of private fishing access in favor of HOA-controlled recreational development. Unlawful disposal and redirection of runoff used to reduce lake activity. Actions conducted secretly to avoid homeowner opposition. I let out a slow breath. So that was it. Not some huge conspiracy. Not money laundering. Not something elaborate. Just a petty HOA trying to control who used a lake, and being willing to poison an entire community to get it. Jarrett rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. "Most people wouldn't have pushed this far." I watched the water for a long time before answering. It wasn't about fishing anymore. He nodded. Exactly. Then he left. And I stood alone at the edge of the dock, listening to the quiet breeze, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The lake would recover. The community would recover. People would learn. But the HOA, that version of it was gone forever. The ending. A few months passed. A new HOA board was elected. Real people, reasonable people, people who actually cared about the community instead of controlling it. They apologized. They rebuilt trust. They worked with environmental agencies to heal the damage. And they finally reopened the lake. The first day fishing was allowed again. I walked down to the dock with my old rod. Elena waved from the path. Her dog barked happily. Other families gathered around the shoreline, some with chairs, some with snacks, everyone smiling. I cast my line into the water, and for the first time in months, the lake felt alive again. Peaceful, safe, free, just the way it should have always been. And as the sun set over the quiet rippling water, I realized something simple. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's patient and steady. Sometimes, it comes quietly, one truth at a time, until the people who thought they could get away with anything finally get exposed. And that's exactly what happened here. The HOA tried to control the lake. They tried to control me. They tried to control the truth. But the truth won. And so did the